Hello and welcome to another important video conversations on Awaz-e-Haqiqat, the voice of truth. Depending on whichever part of the world you're watching us from, today or tonight, as you can see on the screen, I'm joined by two very eminent ladies doing some remarkable work in their field. I happen to know one beforehand. I'm meeting the other one for the first time, and I'm equally privileged and honored. I'll get to the introductions in a bit, but if I have to tell you about what it is I'm speaking about, it is about silenced voices, women who have been silenced, women who were not given a platform or an agency or a narrative to express their journeys. I'm talking about a recent book that these ladies have authored and edited. The book is called Sing Slivered Tongue. It's a collection of poetry by women from South Asian writing on trauma. The title of the volume is a reference to the ancient legend of Khona, a wise woman whose tongue was severed by her envious father-in-law. The volume gathers the voices and experience of various women from various South Asian communities to explore the subject of trauma through a gendered lens. And I will leave the rest for the ladies to go through when we start the discussion. I am joined by Lopamudra Basu. Lopa is a professor of English at University of Wisconsin-Stout. She is the author of Ayad Akhtar, The American Nation and Its Others After 9/11, Homeland Insecurity, and the co-editor of Passage to Manhattan, Critical Essays on Meena Alexander. Her articles have been published in journals like Humanities, Women's Studies, Studies in the Novel, South Asian Review, Social Text, and in anthologies like Narratives of Trauma in South Asian Literature, Drawing from Life, Memory and Subjectivity in Comic Art, Masks of Thread, South Asian Racialization and Belonging After 9/11, and a History of Indian Poetry in English. Thank you for joining me, Lopa. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your kind introduction and for giving us this opportunity.
The pleasure and the honor is all mine. And my second guest, this is my second opportunity to sit down with her. Always lovely whenever I speak to her. Dr. Feroza Josephala is a professor emerita at the University of New Mexico, where she won the Alumni Teaching Award in 2014. She taught at the University of Texas at El Paso from 1980 to 2001, and at the University of New Mexico from 2001 to 2021. She is the author and co-editor of several books, primarily on postcolonial literatures, Family Quarrels, towards a criticism of Indian writing in English, Peter Lang, 1984, Interviews with the Writers of the Postcolonial World, Conversations with V.S. Naipaul, and Emerging South Asian Women's Writing. Thank you so much for joining, Dr. Feroza. It's a pleasure to have you again.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's really a pleasure to be with you. We last talked when I let out the book, Memory, Voice, and Identity, Muslim Women's Writing from Across the Middle East. And you talked with me and my co-editor, Doa Omran. So I'm very happy to be with you again and to reach out to your audience, which is always a very incisive and interesting audience. So I'm very thankful to being here with you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation. But before I formally begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am meeting both of you this morning. It's morning here in Australia. These ladies are coming to me from the US. So I would like to extend my respect to the people of the Kulin Nation and also to the elders past, present, and emerging. On that note, the first question that I have for both of you is, what prompted you to voice the collections highlighting women's trauma through multiple ages? Lopa, I'll start with you, and Feroza, I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for acknowledging the ancestors of the land that you currently inhabit. I would also like to follow your lead and acknowledge the Ojibwe, the Dakota, and the Ho-Chunk people of Wisconsin, where I'm speaking from. Going to your question about why we chose women's trauma, I think we were interested in a anthology of women's poetry because we felt there was a deficit there. We, did a survey of existing anthologies, and we found that there was a kind of a canonization of male poets.
Yeah.
And there was, an older anthology, 9 Indian women poets by Eunice D'Souza, but that's at least, several decades ago. So there was nothing current that we saw, and we felt there was a gap or a vacuum that we wanted to fill. We also felt that, women's writings, sometimes do not conform to established notions of what is considered poetic or aesthetically pleasing. There are more jagged edges sometimes, and therefore they are not easily accommodated. So we wanted to, give a space to these experiences which are difficult, and the expressions of which also come out in fragments. They are not always, as Firoza says, not always in established poetic forms, but we wanted to explore those. And of course we were influenced by the times that we inhabit, where we feel that women's rights are under threat, and not just in the South Asian nations
Yeah.
or its diasporas, but everywhere, kind
Globally.
of across the board.
Yeah.
And so it felt timely to address that issue, and it also felt like, in terms of literature, there was a need to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so in sync with you when you say it's a global problem, because when I talk to women, I used to think that this is South Asian problem, but no, it's not. It's everywhere. It just people don't talk about.
Yes.
Thank you for that start of the conversation. Firoza, I'll come to you. What are your thoughts on voicing the collective trauma?
Well, first of all, like you, I should also acknowledge the native lands that I'm sitting on. My house actually sits on Navajo land, what was before Navajo and Native American land, and so also is the university that I'm very close to. So I give thanks to our Navajo ancestors as well as to all our other ancestors that we have acknowledged, such as Khona and even Philomena in our anthology, Sing Slivered Tongue. I also want to thank Lopa Basu very much for coming to me with this proposal and this idea. It is basically her idea, and she did a lot of the work in actually putting the volume together. So I'm very grateful to her for her assistance and her inclusion. I'm honored that she included me. I think she sensed the fact that I was living through, as you know, Chris, for a while you've known and you'd wanted me to talk about. She realized that I was living through trauma, and she thought perhaps that this would help me to voice out my own trauma. And we thought, let's look at trauma, how it is experienced by women, and whether it's just a South Asian issue or whether it's a diasporic issue or whether it is sort of a universal issue. And, every one of the themes that we have explored or our poets have explored are all universal, whether it's child abuse, domestic abuse, familial abuse, whether it is um, divorce related, whether it is also politics related, but we don't want to essentially talk about that because some people do go through very severe trauma in that sense. But, we want to talk about how women have been, quote unquote, subalternized. So I'm a great believer in Gayatri Spivak's idea that women are not allowed to speak. Can the subaltern speak? Can the woman who has been um, characterized, stereotyped as being different from perhaps a hegemonic dominant, say, white culture or any other culture, can she come out and speak? Can the subaltern have voice for their own issues? And that is a very important issue for me. At the back of the book, there is a little blurb by Bapsi Sidhwa, one of the famous South Asian women writers, fiction writer from Pakistan, who went through herself a lot of trauma. And she says women speaking on trauma need to be given voice, recognition, and exposure. And that's what her novels do. And that's what I think we are trying to do in this particular work is we're talking about how women need to express themselves. And, is that cathartic? Does that help women articulate their pain and then come to a homeostasis? But for me, it takes one more step, which is the more elderly women like myself articulate the pain that we go through by separation, by abandonment, by having to make our lives over and over again, by dislocation. If we could talk about that, then we can teach younger women how to deal with, so that they understand that what's happening to them has happened before, and perhaps there has to be a way to change it. Perhaps your audience has ideas on how to sort of resist the kind of abuse, whether it's familial, whether it's child abuse, whether it's in school, whether it's from cultural groups, whether it's from being different, feeling different. There's a poem in here by a Parsi woman about being different, and being considered Navajo, for instance. And she talks about how to sort of bridge those gaps. So those are the important things that cause trauma. Sometimes going to school and experiencing early childhood trauma in that sense leaves a mark on you, and one is not able to get beyond those memories. And writing it down as poetry, encapsulating, just capturing the image, the emotion at that very moment, helps a person put ideas into their pages, into their words, and then to even express that even several years later, and then come to some sense of a balance. So I think it's very important that we give women the voice. It's not to say or to discount the trauma that men experience also. And very many men experience and live with various kinds of traumas that they experience as children, so forth. And sometimes that rolls over into becoming either domestic abuse or not being able to handle it. Perhaps even looking at these poems would give parents ideas about how they might moderate or modulate their reactions to their children. So some of the poems in here are extremely poignant. And when we come to that point, I might want to read one or two as we come along.
Thanks, Firoza. There is a question on trauma, but I'll come to it later. But before that, both of you said that this happens to all women, many women, irrespective of ages. And probably we can, through this narrative, we can give an agency to the newer generation. Now, when I was doing some research for the conversation, this Khona is obviously a mythological character, and her tongue was severed. This basically is illustrative of how our voices are taken away, how our agency is basically taken away. My next question is that, does this happen? Does this still happen in modern age and time? And is this regardless of caste, creed, and race? So Firoza, I'll start with you this time, and then Lopa, I'll come to you.
Yes, it's very much so. It's not only limited to caste or uh, caste or culture or class or things like that. It just something something triggers a kind of a response, either in a male or in a male culture, or the way in which our male culture has been cultivated, as it were. And so it just seems like what happened to Khona happens today. What happened so long ago continues to happen and continues to be a shape and form of oppression. So we can say, for instance, I hate to pigeonhole and or stereotype our South Asian culture, but our South Asian culture does seem to perpetrate and multiply and for some reason bring forth attack on women and women's bodies. And I don't understand why that's particularly so, but it's also universal. We don't want to talk about the politics, but recently in US politics, we have talked so much about major politicians who have enacted sort of acts of violence on women's bodies. Again, I go back to Bapsi Sidhwa, and she talks in her Cracking India about how women's bodies, whether they are Muslim women's bodies, whether they are Hindu women's bodies, whether they are Anglo-Indian women's bodies, become the sites of violence, become the sites of bringing out things that happen where women's breasts are cut off or women are are tragically attacked in some shape or form. And why that happens, or why it's seen as though women are not empowered enough to stand up, or why there is a problem with with dealing with women or seeing them as weak,
Yeah.
I don't understand. For that purpose, let me give you one small example from our book, which I find very poignant and important, because you asked this, and it's not that group rape or violence on women doesn't happen everywhere, that it happens in all cultures, that it happens in white culture. We just had a man convicted who killed a bunch of white women in Idaho, white college women in Idaho. But here is an example. Lakshmi Sri Banerjee, who is one of our poets, wrote a poem in memory of the global protest social revolution against the brutal rape and murder of a female doctor in R.G. Kar Hospital,
Yeah.
Kolkata. And I will read that to you. That night, the shimmering stars hid themselves in utter shame, as did the night while watching the monstrosity of the dark game. They throttled, raped, and ripped apart her with inhuman torture in caverns of stress, as darkness wished to hide in the dark, to run away from being such a witness. Intoxicated with blind Dionysian fury, they forgot their mothers, sisters in their black souls. They forgot the warmth of the women, and they defiled brutally the genesis of the whole. So it's interesting that we note that men seem to forget that they too have females who bred them, who raised them, who gave them birth, who and yet they act out their violence on women in this shape and form,
Yep.
and it happens everywhere. It
Absolutely.
happens everywhere.
That incident on which this poet is based, Rosa, last year we were all shaken. We were just shaken. We had protest in Melbourne, and the more so because a similar incident panned out in Delhi, which was the Nirbhaya case. I'm sure you must have heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
We were questioning even last year, where are we headed? Even after 12 years, the same kind of incident kind of just, and I think even a few days ago, a similar incident has again come up.
Yes.
I don't know where we are headed, but a slight trigger warning to our audience. We are talking about some sensitive issues. If you feel that you want to kind of listen to it when you have time, if you're mentally healthy to listen, please take your time to listen to it. Lopa, I'll come to you. Same question. What triggers this treatment towards women? Is it still happening?
I agree with Firoza that it is indeed still happening. In fact, I would argue that it is, misogyny is on the increase. We did have a period of more rights being afforded to women, but now we are in a period of a backlash. And globally, we are seeing that. We are seeing the rise of more patriarchal nationalisms, and that those muscular militant nationalisms often have very detrimental effects on women. And we can see that, all across the board. It's not just in South Asian cultures or Middle Eastern cultures, where, there are these in the Euro-American and Australian world, white world, there's this notion that there is more liberties afforded to women in these spaces, and there's a lack of liberty in places which are associated with, restrictions on clothing or perhaps arranged marriages, etc. But I want to challenge this binary division, because if I have to go back to my teaching, which is kind of threaded into my poetry as well. So I teach, course on graphic narratives, and I teach, the famous Persepolis by Marjan Satrapi, which is about the Iranian Revolution, and I juxtapose that with Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which is also now available as a graphic novel. And there are such remarkable similarities in terms of even clothing. Like the handmaids have to wear the red, dress with the bonnet, and now, Marjan in her childhood has to wear the veil. So, it is across cultures. And why is it? I feel that, it's question of power, and, who gets to hold on to power, and how to, deprive significant parts of the population, not women as well as other minorities, are lacking access to power, to voice, etc. But going back to the myth of Khona, with which you began your question, Chris, even though Khona was subjected to this great brutality of having her tongue cut out by her jealous, competitive father-in-law, who didn't like her progress in astrology, she could no longer speak, but whatever she had spoken, they still exist. I mean, Khana is supposed to have lived in medieval Bengal, so she had, like agricultural advice on how to plant seeds, what is the way to tend to animals. Those little couplets or phrases or folk wisdom that she spoke of have lived on in folk memory. So that there is a little bit of hope in that. I mean, they could perhaps kill her, or they could kill her immediate voice, but the things that she spoke of and truth, that survives. And there is that hope in our anthology too, that giving voice and creating something which is beautiful, even in the midst of so much pain and suffering, will endure beyond the present moment. And people will look back to it for inspiration if they are faced with similar situations. So, we have tried to emphasize this in our introduction, that it is not, this process, although our topic is heavy, we were seeking hope through writing. Through establishing community, through being able to speak of the unspeakable and not be censored. So the way in which these constraints, I mean, when we said that it still operates, it may not be as direct as cutting off someone's tongue, but women are still subjected to many forms of censorship. And it's not necessarily about gender. It's also about speaking truth to power. And whenever you challenge, structures of power, you will not be afforded a space to speak about. And in the U.S. right now, I think a lot of people are afraid to speak. Our First Amendment rights are increasingly not looking very certain.
I agree. I think that the severing of the tongue now has become metaphorically accurate, because our tongues are not cut off, obviously, but it's happening in real time.
Yeah.
Both of you mentioned that something triggers in the male culture or in the perpetrator by which these series of actions happen. Power play, mindset, broken family, we don't know, but something triggers. Now, when it comes to a woman in our societies, what is expected of a woman through various phases in her life? What do we need to fill out? And have those expectations from us changed with time? Lopa, I'll start with you this time. Firoza, I'll come to you.
I was thinking about this question. In some ways, I think, the same sort in South Asian culture, certain expectations of normative femininity still exist, even though we say, we have broken off from those. We do have expectations of being, the dutiful daughter. The expectation of kind of serving the family is very much something that endures through life, whether it is as a daughter, as a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother, we have to fulfill these maternal nurturing roles. And if we deviate from that, or if we reject that, there's a lot of social stigma and censorship, or even censure associated with, not fulfilling those roles. Well, even now, I mean, women who refuse motherhood, they're not going to be looked upon very kindly. There is often the association that they are, heartless, or they don't have the maternal instinct. And where we know very well that, motherhood is not given its due in terms of the fact that, it is really unpaid labor for years and years. And it's in many parts of the world, including the US, there is no social support for this activity, in the form of not having paid parental leave, not having adequate childcare, not having anything in place to support the mother. And yet, if she refuses to be the quintessential all-sacrificing mother, or she lays any claim to her own identity, she's immediately going to be critiqued for that. So that endures. Even, and I think it is more difficult as the generations go on. Perhaps in the time of when I look upon my mother's life, in a way it was circumscribed, and there were some women in her generation who were working outside the home, but she chose to be a homemaker. When it came to my generation, growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was kind of expected that you would get an education and work outside in some capacity. What was not told to us is that you would still have to do everything that your mother did, and yet again fulfill these new roles. So this and I see with younger colleagues how difficult it is to manage everything, especially in the US context, where there's very few social supports. There is no extended family. There is a lack of affordable childcare. So the pressures are quite intense on women.
I agree. I'm not married yet, and I have a PhD. People still say, you are very opinionated. That is the reason, probably. I said, well, can't help it. I can't dumb my voice down. Thank you, Lupa, for bringing that out. Firoza, over to you. Have our expectations from a woman changed with time?
Well, I don't know if our expectations have changed, but you originally asked if there are stages to a
Yes.
woman's life. And yes, you know what? I'm going to take an example here, or a metaphor here, from basically our caste system, as it were, where how a man is supposed to be first a kshatriya, a vyasa, and then sort of going into a sort of a spiritual sannyasin kind of stage. So those are the sort of stages of life. And Shakespeare, of course, has his long thing about the stages of life, the long soliloquy from As You Like It. But these are happening to us now. As Lopa said, as we go to college, as we get for an education, and for most of us, if we have the opportunity and the chance, then we are expected at the beginning to somehow establish ourselves, to set ourselves up as career women, to set ourselves up as being able to do things for ourselves. And I think that is a slight change in expectation, whereas before, many women expected to be taken care of by husbands or brothers or things like that, and not have to work out of the home. But increasingly in India, due to economic pressures, whether it's in India or here, it's gotten to the point where women have to kind of support themselves, have to find a way to support themselves. But then comes that whole stage that Lopa talked about, wifehood, motherhood. Then what do you do? And of course, now in America, there's the very big discussion. Should you give up your family and stay home, or give up your career and stay home, or give up your family and go to work? Are you a better mother if you choose to stay home with your children? This is sort of gotten all wrapped up in a sense of Christianity about whether women should stay home and take care of their family, and thus have a better familial relationship later on. So this has become one issue. But then there's also the whole stage of the gray divorce. So more and more older women are being abandoned, not just ordinary ones like us, but Jeff Bezos, Gates, all of them have basically had a great divorce. And then there is the whole issue. Then what happens to the woman? Does she kind of go towards a spirituality? Does she go towards a sort of a sannyasin kind of stage? How does she take care of the children? Do the children interact? Is she left alone to deal with herself? These are the stages my life has gone through. And I kind of ask myself, how did this happen? But it didn't just happen to me. It happened to my maternal grandmother. I wrote a poem about this for Silver Birch Press, and I don't have it handy, or I would read it to you. It happened to my maternal grandmother, who was very early widowed. Her husband passed away while my mother was just still 12 years old. So then the pressure was on my uncle to be able to support the family. And then later on my mother, as soon as she got an education, to go to work, and she started teaching as a university professor and to support the family. And it's ironic to me, I think, is there some kind of a karma? Is there a sort of a generational curse that, my maternal grandmother was alone, my mother was alone, and here I am alone. And we make our lives forward alone. But it's not just my story. It's the story of many, many women who are living through this kind of experience, wives of university professors, wives of university presidents. We see among our friends who are suddenly find themselves alone, and what the New York Times has now called elder orphans. And how do women as elder orphans make their way into older age, into more elderhood, as it were. And that's become a major issue. So those expectations have changed in the sense where a woman could expect to be taken care of in her old age. But that's now changed. And now women have to be prepared to take care of themselves in their old age. And it's particularly problematic where governments want to cut off funding from Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. Even in the best of situations, like in the Scandinavian countries, where people are saying, should we still be supporting, should we provide health care to the aging, or should we instead encourage early death? And so it's all very problematic now, the whole role of women, how it has changed in many ways. So we can't count on anything anymore other than ourselves, our spirituality, our strength that is within us. And that's where the importance of this volume of poetry comes out, is that we are, as this cover shows you, we are alone. We are here thinking, pondering, what should our circumstance be? It's a great image for the book and for us. We are now alone. How do we, as alone women, sit and think, what should, her hand on her, what am I going to do? It's that kind of gesture. So what am I going to do? How am I going to think about it? And that's where that female sitting alone pondering her circumstance becomes an important image or a metaphor for women per se. And I don't know what the demographics of your audience are, whether they are younger or older, but they're all going to have to think about, what happens to me when I'm after 50? What happens to me when I'm after 60? Where am I going to go, and what can I achieve, or how do I start my life all over again? So it's a new kind of dislocation.
Wow. Thanks, Rosa. Thank you for highlighting. Yes, Lopa.
Just thinking about what Firoza was saying, I think this isolation and this change in familial structures, also influenced by globalization and diaspora, uh, produces a whole generation of women, even in India, who are alone. Basically, I'm thinking of my mother, who, even though she has two daughters, who have not abandoned her, but who are just physically very distant from her. And, like after losing, my father to COVID, she has had to learn everything to manage on her own. And that is, so it can happen in so many different configurations. It can be, abandonment, it can be, the loss of a spouse to divorce or to death, and then you have to kind of reinvent yourself as a woman, and sometimes at a pretty advanced age, figure out how to do things.
Important points, both of you, but that raises a question in my mind, are our societies or our familial setups preparing our generation so that we are able to think of a life by ourselves? Are we preparing our daughters and sons to think that way? Lopa, your thoughts, and then Firoz, I'll come to you.
I don't know whether we are doing it adequately. I think we should be doing more. I think, the pressure on younger women is very much to get coupled. That's the when I see my younger students, for instance, their lives revolve around ideas of a romance, finding the perfect partner, settling down, having children. So that is those are the cultural kind of values that are circulating all around us. Very rarely are we taught to think, hey, how will I manage on my own if this plan A doesn't work out, right? And we are also reluctant to talk about negative things, like whether it's death or whether it's divorce. Those are things like, taboo topics. We don't engage with them. So we are, and especially death, it's very, there is a book by Roz Chast called Can We Please Talk About Something More Pleasant? It is about Roz, who's a New Yorker cartoonist, and her attempts to talk to her mother about end of life issues. Like, what are we going to do if you have to go to a nursing home? Even these conversations are very limited, especially in South Asian context. Nobody wants to talk about it. But, I'm beginning to have these conversations with my mother. Like, you are alone, you are managing, but if you fall seriously ill, what is going to happen? Where are you going to go? We need to have these conversations. But I think in terms of, what you asked about whether we, consciously make these choices to engage with these issues, I don't think we do. I think we are still fed this illusion of the happily ever after, and finding the perfect partner, etc. And I think that's a mistake. We should be taught about what if this doesn't work out? What am I going to do? How do I rely on my own resources to make my life again?
Okay, thank you, Lopa. Firoz, what are your thoughts? Are we prepping our younger generation?
Chris, I have two things, and I might give some ideas related to that. I wrote a short story which is published in a journal called Weber Studies, and it's called Asha. This short story, Asha, is an amalgamation of two people's stories. Both in my personal experience here, and I want to talk about two things here. One is, so one day before I retired, I was sitting at my computer and I got an email and a phone call from Manushi. And I don't know if you know what Manushi is. It's one of those women's agencies in New Delhi that helps abused women. And they said, look, a young woman has come to your university, but not come to your university, come in an arranged marriage to a man who is a graduate student in your university, and she's being badly beaten up. And can you go? And I first thought, oh my God, do I want to risk this? What if the guy beats me? So I gathered up two people, one person who is now a very successful psychologist, psychiatrist in my hometown of Hyderabad, and another person, Renita Mazumdar, who worked a lot in feminist studies with me. And now she too has gone back to Calcutta because she feels her work is better needed there. And the three of us went, and the girl had been locked up in a graduate student apartment, had not been given food. She was not allowed to go grocery shopping. We went out, we tried to get her help. The fellow came, wanted to beat her up, wanted to beat. This is all happening here. Just like a half a mile down from my house in a liberated Western society. And so we told her, let's call the police, and go to a domestic shelter. And she wouldn't go to a domestic shelter, and she didn't want to call the police. And I talked to her mother and I said, can you give her a ticket? Can she come back? Because, she's getting her face bashed in, and there's no help. And her mother said, no, it's disgraceful. So just keep her there. And that was actually very difficult to do. And it was at the same time that another woman had come from Goa in an arranged marriage, and she too was being beaten up. And we from the Hindu temple tried to get her to a domestic abuse shelter, but she wouldn't go. But she had come with the expectation that the husband would take care of her, he would drive her around. She didn't know how to drive, she didn't know how to adapt. She did have good English because she came from Goa and went to a convent school, as opposed to the other young lady who had come from a village area and did not have English and did not know how to communicate, but she did know well enough to run to a neighbor's apartment. So, these things are happening. This is the expectation. However, I wanted to turn to what happens to older women and what Lopa just said about whether the South Asian cultures want to talk about divorce, death, end of life issues. I am very much a part of my Hindu temple community. But when there are auspicious occasions, I'm not invited to weddings. We've talked about this. I'm not invited to weddings. I'm not invited to very many auspicious kinds of things. Some people are breaking beyond it. And, uh, you know, one family, for instance, had a very big wedding where they booked an entire Hyatt Regency, and they invited every Indian in the neighboring states. I was not invited. And, they said very tactfully, but, you're divorced, you've had cancer, it could be bad luck. So
Oh
we live
gosh.
in these superstitions. So we live in these superstitions and we expect this. I have a friend who works in the Hindu temple. She works as a volunteer. She works whatever money is given to her. She's a widow. Widows are definitely not invited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about it? What do we do? How do we change this conversation? And even among the most enlightened, who are university professors and wives of university professors that I've tried to spark this conversation with, they don't come to it. They don't welcome that conversation. They don't welcome. I say, hey, but look, I'm an example of being able to stand up for myself, to be able to deal with myself. Don't you want your daughters to know this? And especially daughters who are getting into cross-cultural marriages. Do they know where these marriages are going to go? Whether there's going to be cross-cultural understanding, whether there's going to be cross-cultural acceptance? And what happens in that situation. But those traditions, that excess baggage that we have brought with us into diaspora or continue to hold to in our own societies, we have to get beyond that.
Yes.
We have to somehow get women to talk in the conversation and to say, she's not bad luck because she had a divorce, or she's not bad luck because her husband happened to die. That it's not her luck, it's not her astrology, it's not her chart that brought this upon your son or whatever it is. And that is something that is there's a lot of resistance to it, whether it's in diaspora or whether it's at home, is a lot of resistance, and across, whether it's a Muslim community, whether it's a Hindu community, whether it's an Anglo-Indian Christian community, that that is very much a part of us, which is not so in white societies,
I
which is interesting.
I I totally agree, Firoza, because my maternal grandmother, she got widowed when she was my age, 38. She brought two girls all by herself, and all through her life, that stigma of you are a widow, you're not invited, she had to wear white for a long, long time till we kind of forced her out of that. I keep telling people now that if a woman is widowed, it's not her fault. She did not do that intentionally. So that stigma is everywhere, even though people say, no, 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 we are okay. But you're so right, Rosa, that stigma is still present in the society.
Well, I'll give you just one example. Just, we recently had a Durga Puja. Every year we have a Durga Puja. And one of the ladies bought these Shaka Pola bangles, which are the red and the white ones.
Mm.
And she was handing them out to everybody. And but I took mine. I didn't raise any question, but she didn't give it to Rajni. And I said, why not? And she said, well, Rajni can't wear it. She's widowed. I said, what do you mean? Let her wear it. Then I said to Rajni, Rajni, I'll buy you a set. You wear the one that I buy you. And she said, oh, no, no, they told me not to wear it, so I'm not going to wear it. I said, that's nonsense. If you want to wear a red bangle, you wear a red bangle.
I think this is an appropriate moment to read a little poem by Asha Sen, which is about widows in India, and it's called Nobody Loves a Widow. And there's an epigraph by a Wisconsin poet, Bruce Detlefsen, which says, how dare you dream could stop loving someone just because they stopped living? Nobody loves a widow. In India, they burn them. But there are other ways. Sometimes a lover's jealousy, brought on by a living memory of a love long dead, lights up in fury, turning everything to ashes once again. So, it is by Asha Sen, and it's a short poem but very powerful, bringing up, the experiences of widowhood and exclusion that is part of institutionalized religion, and it can take the form of various moments in one's life. So I experienced two deaths during COVID. First, my mother-in-law died in Calcutta, and I could not. I mean, my husband and I could not go. She died at her home without any support because there were no beds available in Delhi. And within 2 weeks of that, my father died in a Calcutta COVID, ward. When we went to do the Moksharchana, which is praying for the salvation of the soul in the Hindu temple in Minneapolis. That puja is done on the 13th day, I believe, and the three of us, my husband, my son and I went to do the puja at the temple, and I told them that I made the mistake of telling them, hey, by the way, I have to come back in 13 days to do another one for my father. And they immediately said, when did your father die? Oh, just 2 days ago? You are not allowed into the temple because you are considered to be inauspicious to the temple. You're going through the period of mourning for one parent. So this was ridiculous. So they went in and did it, and I saw the video, which is this. And I said, how can you do this? And they said, well, please don't argue. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we were so.
Lopa, I think we've lost you. Firoza, can you hear me?
We just wanted, at least somebody to be able to go away, right? No, it's okay. I thought I heard something.
Yeah, now go on.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You were frozen for 1 second.
Did I lose connection?
For 1 second, yeah. But now it's all good.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Lopa. I have seen that it happens. People say that doesn't happen. It happens all too often.
There's a huge
Well, what's scary is that it happens in diaspora. You
Yeah.
know, it should not be happening in a Western country or even in Dubai. You know, I know that in Dubai, more of the culture is dominated by the Muslim societies, but Hindus traveling in Dubai, Parsis traveling in Dubai, or living in Dubai who are expatriates who have made Dubai their home, they still carry on the very cultural superstitions or ways of being, which they should not. Which they should not.
I don't know what happens, Firoza, because I have also seen that people who have migrated are more stern sometimes, are more conservative than maybe some people who are still back in the subcontinent. Maybe it's their way of holding on or their way of not to unlearn certain things, but we have to talk about unlearning values that don't help the community as such. Moving on, I think Lopa will join us in a bit. The next thing that I wanted to ask both of you is, Firoza, how does, coming back to the book and your compilation, how does poetry or prose or spoken word, for that matter, help in trauma release or trauma bonding over a common journey of pain?
Well, the trauma bonding is indeed. This morning we actually had a Zoom on for the metropolitan DC, Washington DC area, where we talked about our issues, and it was interesting that there was trauma bonding across generations from older women who have also, Kanwalpreet Kaur, who is also contributed in this, talking about how after many years of having written a poem, she has, after many years of having written a poem, she was able to bring that poem to birth in our volume because she felt the bond was there. So Lopa and I, we edited the book together, and somebody asked what was your editorial process, and I said the best part of the editorial process was sitting down with Lopa and talking with her about about the about the volume and the submissions that were coming to us. And so as we were talking, there was more bonding between the two of us. But then as we worked with each one of the poets, we also ended up bonding with them. There were some very young voices that asked for our guidance in terms of writing and bringing their voices and their poetry out. I think it's very important that people somehow voice it. It's easier to voice it in poetry and then to voice it in a longer work, whether it's a autobiography or a memoir or a fiction work. There you have to work the threads out. But sometimes this just the emotion, what comes up in your feeling, that immediately encapsulates
Yeah.
the in words, and it's like a cocoon, and you say this, and your ideas get wrapped around and around and around, and you can then say something, and then out of that cocoon comes a butterfly. And that's the important image or metaphor to use in terms of thinking about trauma. But voicing heals. It's very important to write and voice it. Again, here we talk about power structure. We talked about something that triggers, and then the men react or overreact. They can react physically. You can turn your pain into a slap, but we as women cannot do that. We just take the slap and okay, or we could just take what's come to us and it's okay. And at the most, maybe we push back or something, but we don't enact it in that way when the anger comes up. And our anger is never legitimized. It's never, if we speak up and we express our anger, it's never ever legitimized. And so I don't know how we get people to understand that women have to have the power to be able to speak up, that women have to have the power to be able to speak up and to talk back. And that's what this volume does. I hope that, in looking at this volume, many of the younger women can say, okay, I can also speak up. I can also verbalize
Yeah.
and let my words go forward.
Thanks, Rosa. I'm mindful of time, but I have to ask you this one question. Was playing on my mind for a while. We've talked about women owning their narrative, agency, trauma, but at the core of it all, do we teach our women to be subservient to the norms? Do we teach subservience?
Yes, and it's expected. Yes, very much so. And it's expected. And it's expected that we not speak up. If we speak up, or if we stand up for our rights, or if we stand up, oh, you don't have class, oh, you did this, oh, you did that, oh, you spoke at the wrong time. You shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have done this. And so, it comes back on us. It comes back on us. They disown us because we are owning our narrative. They disown us because we are owning our narrative. I'll say that over and over again. If we say that, then sons abandon us, husbands abandon us, and they say, oh, well, it's your story, not ours. Well, my story also has legitimation. I did make the sacrifices. I have done the things that you are refusing to accept that I did. And, women get just cut down. And I don't know what it is, whether it's something that starts with the biblical narrative or the Quranic narrative, or even in our culture. The biggest irony is our culture, because we have such very strong gods and goddesses. And, men will fall prostrate at the feet of Lakshmi, asking for money. Men will fall prostrate at the feet of Durga, one of the strongest of women, asking for protection, asking for able to get over the. But if a woman acts like a Durga, no way.
Thanks, Rosa. Sorry, thank you for having us back, Lopa. I think you got a storm. No.
Yeah, it's really storming, and I think my internet disconnected. I'm back on the phone now because
All good. So we lost you for a couple of minutes. Listeners, we have Dr. Lopa Basu again. Lopa, I'll ask the same question I asked Firoza a couple of seconds ago, but I'm also mindful of time. The question that's been playing on my mind all the while I heard you both speak is, are we still teaching our girls subservience? Is that still something prevalent in the society?
I can't speak for everyone, and it's very contextual. I am located in a diasporic community in North America, and I don't have a daughter, but I do have a couple of nieces who are growing up in India, my sister's girls. And I don't think they are getting the message of subservience from their mother, at least directly. They are being encouraged to follow their own paths and to forge their own identities. But I was just reading the collection of short story by Bhanu Mushtaq called Heart Lamp, which won the Booker Prize this year. It's the community of women who are Muslim women speaking Kannada and Urdu, and you can see that in their lives they are still seeing their mothers being very sacrificial and sacrificing, and they are definitely getting the message of serving the family as the main sort of reason for their existence. It is very driven by particular contexts, and I'm sure some people are still giving their daughters the message of not reaching their full potential, but submerging their passions for the good of the family.
Thank you. One last question, and then I'll probably have to wrap it up. And this should be a very direct question to both of you ladies. We've talked about it, around it, but just one direct question to you. does patriarchy still exist? Lopa, first to you, and then Firoza, I'll come to you.
Yes, absolutely. I do believe it does. It morphs and changes, and it's not exactly the same patriarchy as, in the medieval era or even, the middle of the 20th century. But, while it may not be as overt in subtle ways, it still continues to exert a tenacious hold on our psyches.
All right. Thank you, Lopa. Rosa, your thoughts. Does patriarchy
Oh,
exist?
very much so, very much so, very much so. And as Lopa said a while ago, we are returning to it. We are returning to it, and more men, definitely in Western societies, they are wanting to assert their masculine strength and their patriarchy. It's definitely, I don't know if it's more so in Western societies than in Indian societies, but definitely there is a backlash against what feminism happened. And there are women, ex-feminists, who are writing uh, sort of apologetically and conciliatory. And so it's become a problem, I think. I think still people want us to sort of become subservient, go backwards and not speak up.
Okay.
So that's definitely happening.
All right. And with all these things happening around us, we're living in very difficult times, right? Each day we hear something, we read something that just kind of plays with our mind. So on such a day when things are going difficult and you hear or see things that don't play out exactly the way you wanted, how do you take care of your individual mental health? Firoza, I'll come to you, and Lopa, I'll close the conversation.
Well, Chris, you know that I have extreme, overly much spirituality. So I go from, one prayer practice to another prayer practice to another prayer practice. I have become to believe very strongly in the power of prayer and the power of prayerful protection and the ability to use prayer and rituals. That's another book, Chris, and we can have another conversation.
Thank you, Firoza. Lopa, what are your thoughts? How do you take care of your mental sanity?
Unlike Firoza, I am not, a very much of a spiritual person. It's sort of there marginally in my life, and sometimes I do take recourse to that. But on an everyday basis, I think what sustains me in the worst of times is, perhaps a sense of some, good friends who will stick with me and who have been with me for decades. Even though they are not physically in close proximity, I can still reach out to them and feel comforted. I do still draw comfort from some family members as well, like my mother, and I know that that is a fragile connection because she's aging, but still, I think it still sustains me, or the memory of those who have passed. I think that also gives me a sense of positivity, that they would have figured out a way, and I can also do that. But it just I think nature, just be in Wisconsin, we are surrounded by a wealth of natural beauty, and just going out into the tranquil sort of landscapes helps to calm me down and restore me.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for both of you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of such an amazing, heartwarming, a conversation that raises awareness on so many platforms. Thank you to both of you. To our
Thank you.
audience, I hope that you had a lot to take away from both Firoza and Lopa's words and their expertise. This discussion was a bit sensitive. We talked about a few heavy topics, so please feel free to listen on when you feel comfortable. The book is called Slivered Tongue. It's on, I'll share the Amazon links. See, they're already popping out the book for you. Please go out, please go ahead, buy it, gift it to your family and friends, gift it to anyone who wants to read it. This has an excellent compilation of excellent compilation of women who have written about trauma. And trauma is something we all need to be aware of. It's not it is gender specific. It may not be gender specific, but you and I, everyone needs to know what is trauma, what we are going through in the 21st century. On that note, if you've got any thoughts or feedback or any comment, please write to me at awaz-e-haqiqat@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. I look forward to reading your thoughts and what you think of the conversation. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much again. It was an absolute honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris, for having us. Thank you. Bye.